At 6:30 a.m. on October 7, 2023, the pre-dawn calm over southern Israel was violently shattered. From the Gaza Strip, thousands of rockets ascended into the sky, arcing across the border to rain down upon towns and military installations. This massive barrage created a deafening, fiery curtain, serving as the overture for a large-scale, coordinated operation from land, sea, and air. This was the start of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, an assault targeting Israeli military bases and communities situated near the Gaza perimeter. The continuous thud of rocket explosions provided a grim soundtrack as the ground phase of the operation commenced. Elite Nukba armed groups, equipped with automatic rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and hand grenades, surged forward. They moved with speed and precision in pickup trucks and on motorcycles, heading for pre-planned breaches in the sophisticated border fence that separated Gaza from Israel. Simultaneously, other fighters descended from the sky using powered parachutes, gliding past the initial lines of defense to land deep inside Israeli territory. As the desert wind howled, the first sharp cracks of small arms fire echoed from the border outposts, signaling the beginning of direct ground engagements. The first phase of the operation was characterized by surprise infiltration and the systematic targeting of key military positions. Small, highly mobile groups of fighters advanced swiftly, penetrating deep into Israeli territory. They moved on communities such as the kibbutzim of Be'eri and Kfar Aza, as well as critical military installations like the Riem military base and the Nahal Oz outpost. At the main gates of these locations, intense firefights erupted almost immediately. The attackers engaged sentries and guards, using their numerical advantage in the initial moments to overwhelm the first lines of defense. Near the border, Israeli Merkava tanks, symbols of the nation's military might, were targeted with RPGs. The explosions sent plumes of thick black smoke billowing into the morning sky as the armored vehicles were set ablaze. Inside the captured military facilities, the attackers stormed command buildings and barracks. The fighting quickly devolved into close-quarters combat, a brutal and chaotic struggle through dark corridors and confined spaces. Israeli soldiers, many of whom were on duty during a holiday, were caught completely off guard. They scrambled to grab their weapons, hastily barricading doors and establishing makeshift defensive positions. From rooftops and fortified rooms, they returned fire, the sound of their rifles adding to the cacophony of the battle. The shouts of commanders, attempting to rally their troops and coordinate a response amidst the smoke and dust, were nearly drowned out by the continuous roar of gunfire and explosions. Meanwhile, a different scene of chaos was unfolding just a few miles away. The site of the Nova Music Festival, held in an open field near Rim, thousands of young people had been dancing through the night. The celebratory electronic music was abruptly cut short by the unmistakable sound of automatic gunfire. Armed groups had surrounded the festival grounds, firing indiscriminately into the panicked crowd and at the vehicles people were using to try and escape. The air, once filled with music, was now thick with screams of terror and the percussive reports of rifles. Festival-goers scattered in every direction, desperately seeking cover in the sparse bushes and open fields. A handful of local security personnel and armed civilians present at the event attempted to organize a defense, engaging the attackers in a desperate, outgunned effort to protect the fleeing crowd. The main phase of the fighting raged throughout the entire day, a sprawling and brutal conflict that stretched across dozens of separate locations in southern Israel. The initial clashes at the border quickly expanded into a series of running battles as the attacking forces moved deeper into Israeli territory. They successfully seized control of several temporary military bases, capturing significant quantities of weapons, ammunition, and military vehicles. They also took numerous soldiers prisoner, adding another layer of complexity to the unfolding crisis. The fighters moved with agility between the kibbutzim and small towns, often using captured civilian vehicles to approach their targets and maintain the element of surprise. The decentralized nature of the assault created a fluid and chaotic battlefield, making it difficult for the Israeli Defense Forces to establish a coherent front line. In response, the Israeli Air Force began to provide air support. Attack helicopters flew low over the landscape, their rotors beating a heavy rhythm in the air as they fired rockets at exposed groups of fighters on the ground. The powerful explosions from these airstrikes rocked the earth, sending shockwaves through the embattled communities. As the day wore on, Israeli infantry units from nearby bases began to arrive, pouring into the conflict zones to launch counterattacks. Area by area, they engaged the attacking forces, attempting to reclaim lost ground. Armored vehicles, including tanks and armored personnel carriers, advanced slowly through the streets of the towns in kibbutzim, but they faced stiff resistance, coming under heavy and sustained RPG fire from well-positioned fighters. In larger towns like Sderot and Ofekim, the conflict escalated into fierce urban warfare. The streets became battlegrounds, with armed police officers and local armed civilians taking up defensive positions at intersections and behind parked cars. They traded fire with the attackers, who had taken cover in residential buildings and alleyways. The fighting was intense and personal, a house-to-house struggle for control. Israeli Special Forces units were deployed by helicopter, landing in the heart of the contested areas to begin the methodical and dangerous work of clearing houses one by one. The narrow residential streets echoed with the continuous blast of grenades and the unrelenting chatter of automatic weapons fire as both sides fought for every inch of territory. As the late afternoon turned to evening on October 7th, the tide of the battle began to shift. Large-scale reinforcements from the Israel Defense Forces, mobilized throughout the day, started to arrive in significant numbers. These fresh, heavily armed units gradually began to regain control of key strategic points that had been overrun in the initial hours of the assault. The Israeli military re-established its command and control structure, coordinating a more systematic and overwhelming counteroffensive. Having achieved their primary objectives of causing widespread disruption, inflicting heavy casualties, and taking prisoners, the attacking forces began a calculated and organized retreat back toward the Gaza Strip. They moved under the cover of the gathering darkness, taking their captives with them. However, not all of the attacking groups were able to withdraw successfully. Several small units found themselves cut off and surrounded by the advancing Israeli forces. Throughout the night, intense firefights continued as these isolated pockets of resistance were engaged and ultimately eliminated. By the morning of October 8th, and continuing into October 9th, the Israeli government declared that it had regained control over most of the border area. The initial phase of the operation was over, leaving a scene of widespread devastation. The human cost was staggering. The Israeli side reported over 1,200 casualties, a mix of civilians and military personnel. With hundreds more taken hostage and transported into Gaza, the attacking forces also suffered heavy losses during the fighting and the subsequent Israeli counterattack, with reports indicating that hundreds of their fighters had been killed. This asymmetrical attack demonstrated how meticulous planning, surprise, and multidirectional coordination could be used to bypass and penetrate modern technologically advanced defense systems. The attackers leveraged a massive rocket barrage to create confusion and divert attention, while their ground forces used rapid infiltration tactics to sow deep disarray within the Israeli rear. The defenders, though caught by surprise and initially overwhelmed, ultimately relied on their ability to mobilize rapid reinforcements and leverage their significant air superiority to mount a gradual, methodical, and overpowering counterattack. Operation Al-Aqsa achieved a profound strategic surprise, allowing its forces to penetrate deeper into Israeli territory and inflict greater losses than in any conflict for decades. However, the gains were temporary, and the operation did not result in the long-term seizure of territory. Instead, it served as the catalyst for a new, large-scale, and protracted conflict. The State of Israel initiated a massive military operation in the Gaza Strip, fundamentally altering the landscape of the region and setting the stage for a prolonged and devastating war.